Hello, my name is Joe Cartwright and welcome to my studio. My aim with this painting is to capture the warm glow of the last light of the day over this lovely beach scene. So let's begin. As usual, my first step is to wet the back of my paper, wet it thoroughly. This will allow me to paint on a very flat surface while also giving me more time to paint this complex sunset. While the paper is absorbing the water, I'll work on mixing my initial colours. This is my reference. I'm not going to be trying to replicate it exactly, but what I aim to do is to capture the feeling of this sky. So what we have here is this lovely cool blue contrasting against these warm oranges and reds, highlighted with this bright yellow at this point here. These sky colours then modify the reflections in the water and the colour of the sand as well. But we'll begin by working on the sky and maybe doing a little bit on the sand. All right, so we have quite a bit of blue. We've got quite a bit of the red, orange, small amount of the yellow, and then the sand colour can go here. So for the sky, I'll start with some Cobalt Blue. And because it's a sunset, it's not going to be as bright and vibrant as pure Cobalt Blue is. So we'll modify that with a little bit of permanent rose. And that should work for our purposes. And then for the orange, we'll start with some Cad Orange. But it has a lot more red in it, so I'll add some Scarlet Lake. And that's pretty good for a base colour. I'll modify these colours as I'm painting. And then we have just a small amount of Cad Yellow. Don't want to make it too thick or it can become opaque. And then for the sand, if we look at our reference, you can see it's more of a brown, a warm brown. I'm going to start with some Raw Umber, just as a base colour. Then I'm going to add a small amount of Scarlet. Oops. That went to the wrong spot. That's okay. I'm going to add a small amount of Scarlet Lake to that mix. And because there's no bright light actually hitting it, this colour is also somewhat dulled. So I'll add a little bit of French ultramarine. And that gets us much closer to the colour we need. Drop in a small amount of permanent rose as well. Good. So there's our sand colour. We'll go back to our paper and I'll wet it once more. It's amazing how much water this paper absorbs. This is 185 GSM Arches cold pressed paper. And I'll wet my board. Any quality artist paper will do. With a painting like this, I don't pre-wet the front of the paper. The reason for that is if I do, I won't be able to create any broken edged effects. All my marks will be soft wet on wet. And two, the water that's already on the surface of the paper will dilute the colours I've already mixed. So immediately the tones I've pre-mixed are going to be wrong. Now, if I look at a scene like this, we've got really warm and light colours coming through here and darker colours here. If I immediately start painting the blue sky, it will flow down, and then as I paint the warm, lighter colours, it will mix with those colours and I'll lose the vibrancy. So what I do with a scene like this is turn my board around this way, and I'll paint most of the sky with my board in this position. You can make it easy for yourself by turning the reference on its side. I'm also going to crop the photo. By having the reference in this vertical position, it makes it easy for me to see where I need to put in the light shapes. And you can also see how now these warm colours will flow down this way and preserve their warmth. I'm not too worried about some of the warm colours merging with the blue because frankly they do merge. So we'll start with our blue. I'm going to leave myself plenty of room for colours to flow into one another because there will be some blending. And there's a cooler blue in this area. So pick up some cerulean and cobalt. Now I'll put in the brightest colours, which is this yellow. That'll do. Now we'll go in with the orange. I keep my spray bottle handy. If I feel the surface is drying too fast, I can give it a light spray and that'll preserve the working surface. So right now I'm just putting in the big shapes. I'm going to bring this colour down to the water's edge. And I'm just looking at the big shapes. Already I know this color is too cool. I need to warm it up and also strengthen its tone. And I'll just mix a little puddle of Scarlet Lake and Permanent Rose, and I'll use that to throw in some of these warmer colours. That's a bit too strong. And again, all I'm really doing is trying to create an interesting pattern in my sky here. I'm not sticking to the reference 100%. That little sharp edge there told me that this was too dry, so that's why I gave it a little spray. As each headland moves further away, it will appear to be moving further up the paper. Now, because this is the brightest part of the sky, any light rays will appear to be merging in that position. The trick here is not to make them too obvious, however. So I'm combining a number into one shape. And varying the space between them. Now, this is a bit too bright, so I'll just pick up some of this blue and dull it. Give that another light spray. Mainly in this area because the water is still flowing down the paper. Let's just remove some of this water from the edge. The reason I do that is to make sure that one of these beads of water doesn't accidentally flow onto the front of the paper, and it will create a cauliflower later on if it does that. Just wanted to reduce some of the yellow that's in there. It's a bit too much. And I'm just looking at this as an abstract shape, just trying to create an interesting pattern. Some of this paint will start to flow into the different layers, so I'll just monitor it. A little bit's okay, but I don't want to lose these brighter colours. I'm going to lift some of this yellow. And then I'll get a small amount of yellow. This is cad yellow, very little paint in my brush. Tap my brush on a towel. Good. I'll let that dry. To speed things up, I'll use a hairdryer. So I've dried the top of the paper. That'll stop any of this paint from flowing down here. Now I'm going to paint the hills, and then we'll move into the next section. And all the sky colours will impact these objects on the ground, whether it's the hills or the water or the sand or the figures. The distant hill will be the lightest. This area is further away, so that will be lighter still. And this is the closest hill, and it will be darker still. Now I don't need so much of this paint, so I'll get rid of some of that. Now, while this hill is covered in trees, you're not going to see a lot of green in it, but I'll add a small amount of cobalt turquoise and just a tiny bit of aureolin. This hill is one of the darkest toned areas of the painting. And it also has some trees or a broken edge at the top. So what I'm going to do is pick up my fan brush This is just a cheap hog hair fan brush. I like to use the stiff hog hair fan brushes as opposed to the very soft synthetic ones. The synthetic ones don't work as well because the hairs tend to clamp together. So that just creates the edge I'm after. I'll pick up this paint. Now this hill could be a little bit stronger in tone, so I'll just darken that a bit. One of the things I do with painting like this is I get some clean water and dab that clean water in one or two places along the water's edge. And then when I paint, as I paint through it, it'll create some nice edge variation. Not very clean water, is it? But it's clean enough. I also want to aim to create some broken edges along the water's edge. Paint right through the little puppies. They're Shih Tzus. These tops will be a bit light in colour, so I don't want to paint through them at this stage. Trousers are fine to paint through. And again, tones in the distance are going to be lighter than the ones in the foreground, so what I'll do now, I'll add more paint. Darken it again. Get my size 8 brush, and there's lots happening on the beach, lots of footprints and paw prints. So I'll just add some splatter to that just to add a little bit of texture. Vary the thickness. Grab a little bit of burnt sienna as well, I think. I want to leave a little bit of these little highlights, but not too much. Try to avoid creating clumps of splatter. So what I was doing there is I was connecting this shape, and this shape, so that they're more one shape rather than three little different shapes. Now I'm going to soften this leading edge here. Get a clean brush, take out most of the water. All right, now this needs to dry, and then we can do the water and then the figures. We're now going to do the water. We have a look at the reference. You can see how the colours go from this blue colour here to this warmer orangey colour here, and that's because the water is reflecting the colours from the sky. Other parts of the water are affected in the same way. So let's look at what colours we have in my palette. The water goes from a steely blue colour, which would normally be just French ultramarine and burnt sienna, but I've also allowed some of these other colours to be mixed in with it. It's too warm. I'll add some Cobalt Blue and some more burnt sienna into it. A bit more burnt sienna, a bit more Cobalt Blue. And then some of this red will go into the water as well, but we need a brighter area, so I'll just pick up some of this cad yellow. Probably a bit strong. I'll add some water to that to dilute it, but it's not a bad colour. Notice how all I did is, because the reflections are a dull colour in this case, I just took the colours that were already in the palette and just mixed them all up, because there wasn't a lot of them, and then I added the yellow into that, so that gives me a dirty yellow colour, which will work well. Now, in our reference, the colour of the water is lighter than the colour of these hills, so that's telling me already these hills here are too light. So I'm going to darken them before I do anything else. I usually try to hit the right tone in one go, but I don't always succeed at that, so that's where I have to come back in and just glaze over these hills to make them a bit stronger in tone. And I'll just extend this colour through to here. This way I preserve the tonal variations between the three hills. Make sure I haven't left a sharp edge up there. Just need to soften this. I'll add a small amount of extra colour here. Okay, now I'll go and dry this. Back to our colour mixing. So we've got this colour for the distant water. I'll adjust that as I come forward. I'll add a bit of cobalt turquoise to it as well, so I see a hint of that green. I'm going to put some foam into the picture. It's not in the reference, but I think the foam adds a bit of action. A lot of foam. The water gets lighter in tone as it moves into this shallow section, plus it changes colour. Now there's some thicker ripples in the water. Just some French ultramarine, cobalt turquoise and some burnt sienna. These also change colour as they get into the shallower water like here. And some of these ripples near the sand will have shadow on them, darker little sections. I try to extend marks like, this wave here. I try to extend it across both figures. That way the painting doesn't look like it sort of stops at one point and turns into something else on the other side. And this hill will have a hint of a reflection, so I'll put that in. Now this is just a bit too dark. Okay, that's good. Let's let this dry now, and then we'll work on the figures. Now the figures are in silhouette, so I'm only going to be hinting at the colours, and also because they're small shapes, most of my work will be done with a smaller brush, like my size 8. For the flesh tones, I'm going to use some raw umber with a tiny bit of burnt sienna. It's too dark. It needs to be a bit warmer than that. So I'm just going to use some Raw Umber, a small amount of Scarlet Lake. Top of the figure where the light hits the shoulders will be a bit lighter. The back of the arms will also have a bit of a shadow. And these figures will have a shadow. And the shadow will be away from the light. And the two shadows will merge with one another. Something like that. these little puppies. I think I'll go to a smaller brush for that. And they will also have a shadow, but I'm going to give them a lighter shadow. Now, on these beaches, quite often you have bits of seaweed or sticks and things like that. So I'll just pick up a warm grey colour. Just throw some of that in. Underneath some of these highlights, I'll just put a little shadow. Don't know what they are. I don't know if there's a lot of rocks on this beach or not, but they could be seashells or something like that. Again, I'm just doing it to make this area a little bit more interesting. I haven't finished this lady yet because I have to do her arms, but I was waiting for the rest of her clothing to dry. Just a darker area that's in shadow for the arm. And we're going to throw some seabirds up here. First thing I do is look for any dots, stray dots that came about from splatter or other sources. So there's a dot there. Well, that obviously was meant to be a bird. Main thing is to vary their size and shape. Smaller birds will look like they're in the distance, bigger ones will come forward. Just adding a bit of a shadow under some of these little waves coming into the shore. And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. It helps me out quite a bit. And if you're able, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.